Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes: some Democrats worry Biden's team is ignoring political warning signs. Testifying in civil case, Trump clashes with judge and draws reprimands. A disgraced former Trump official wants to deport Palestinians. Tlaib draws criticism from fellow Democrats with comments about Israel, Palestinians. Democrats in Congress weigh calls for ceasefire amid pressure from the left. Some Democrats worry Biden's team is ignoring political warning signs. Washington Post. Concerns are growing among Democrats that President Biden's re-election campaign is not on the right track, with polls showing former President Trump leading Biden in a potential head-to-head matchup nationally and in several swing states. Democrats are particularly worried about Biden's support among black voters, which may be softening due to disillusionment with his policies, especially on student debt and Israel. Democrats are urging Biden to shift his messaging and tactics, campaign more actively, and address his weaknesses with younger people and Black and Latino voters. Testifying in civil case, Trump clashes with judge and draws reprimands. Washington Post. Donald Trump has testified in a $250 million civil trial where he and his business are accused of a years-long fraud. New York Attorney General Letitia James last year sued Trump, his adult sons, and their namesake company, accusing them of dramatically inflating the values of real estate properties to get better financial terms with banks and insurers. Engoron already ruled before the trial that Trump and his company broadly committed fraud. He is hearing the case without a jury and will determine whether specific illegal acts occurred in the process and decide any potential penalties. Trump defended his company, lashed out at the case and his inquisitors and clashed with the judge. Trump, the leading candidate for the Republican nomination next year, has repeatedly assailed James's case, denied any wrongdoing and insisted that he is being targeted for political reasons. Testifying for hours Monday, he delivered often extended, meandering remarks, praising his business acumen and slamming the judge. James is seeking to have Trump and his business pay at least $250 million in penalties, and wants them blocked from doing business in New York State. A disgraced former Trump official wants to deport Palestinians. Washington Post. Former Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke, who resigned from the Trump administration in 2018, after over a dozen investigations were launched into his activities, has now filed a bill in his new capacity as Representative Ryan Zinke, Republican Montana. The bill, which calls for the expulsion of Palestinians from the U.S., is unsubtle in its rationale. It pivots from the conflict between Israel and Hamas to allege that Palestinians entering the U.S. are inherently untrustworthy. Zinke's legislation is intended to cast Palestinians as dangerous, criticize President Biden on immigration, and gain attention from right-wing groups. Tlaib draws criticism from fellow Democrats with comments about Israel, Palestinians. Washington Post. Democratic Michigan Representative Rashida Tlaib has been criticized by fellow Democrats for her comments regarding Israel and Hamas. In a recent social media post, Tlaib accused President Biden of supporting the genocide of Palestinians and warned that he may risk losing support in 2024 if he doesn't support a ceasefire. Tlaib also posted a video that included a crowd chanting the phrase, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which is often interpreted as a call for the eradication of Israel. Tlaib defended her use of the phrase, calling it an aspirational call for freedom, but the Anti-Defamation League described it as an anti-Semitic slogan. Tlaib was criticized by fellow Michigan Representative Elissa Slotkin, who called the phrase divisive and counterproductive to promoting peace. Michigan State Senate President pro tempore Jeremy Moss also criticized Tlaib's comments, saying they prey upon the psyche of Jews. Despite the criticism, Tlaib has refused to retract her remarks. Democrats in Congress weigh calls for ceasefire amid pressure from the left. New York Times. Democrats in Congress are struggling with the decision of whether to call for a complete and lasting ceasefire in the ongoing Israeli-Gaza conflict. While many Democrats have urged temporary humanitarian pauses to facilitate aid deliveries to Gaza, few have supported progressive Democrats' demands for a total cessation of hostilities. Most Democrats fear that a full ceasefire would give Hamas time to regroup and launch another assault on Israel. The dilemma faced by Democrats, which mirrors President Biden's own struggle, could have political consequences for the party. Democrats rely heavily on the support of their liberal core supporters, and will need their backing in the 2024 elections. In recent days, progressive polls have indicated that a majority of Democratic voters favor a ceasefire, and there is evidence that younger people and people of color are critical of the Biden administration's stance on the war. The rift among Democrats is deepening as proponents of a ceasefire protest against congressional efforts to fund President Biden's request for military assistance to Israel. Critics argue that the money and weapons will lead to more civilian deaths in Gaza. Factbox, who qualified for the third 2024 Republican presidential debate. Reuters. At least 5 Republican candidates are expected to participate in the third 2024 Republican presidential debate, while Donald Trump will skip the event. The candidates include Ron DeSantis, who is Trump's top rival but is trailing behind him in polls, Vivek Ramaswamy, a former biotechnology investor and executive who has gained grassroots attention as an alternative to Trump, Nikki Haley, a former South Carolina governor and Trump's ambassador to the United Nations, Tim Scott, the only black Republican U.S. senator, and Chris Christie, a former New Jersey governor who advised Trump's campaign, but has become a vocal critic of the former president. Fact check: Biden twice repeats his false Joey baby story about a deceased Amtrak conductor. CNN. President Joe Biden has been telling a story about an exchange he had with an Amtrak worker that has been proven to be false. In the story, Biden claimed that an Amtrak worker, whom he previously identified as Angelo Negri, told him that he had traveled more miles on Amtrak trains than on government planes. However, it has been revealed that Negri died over a year before Biden reached the million miles flown mark as vice president. Biden's mother also died more than 5 years before he reached the milestone. Despite being fact-checked and given ample time to correct himself, Biden has continued to tell the untrue story. Vice Premier He Lifeng to visit U.S. this week, as trade ties shine in Shanghai. South China Morning Post. Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng will visit the U.S. later this week, following improved bilateral relations between the two countries. Senior U.S. officials and business delegates are optimistic about cooperation at the China International Import Expo in Shanghai, particularly in the agricultural technology sector. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has unveiled Washington's first-ever official pavilion at the expo, which it hopes will increase agricultural exports to China. U.S. happy to help countries fearing China's economic coercion. South China Morning Post. The U.S. is willing to share its knowledge of China's economic coercion tactics with other countries that fear retaliation from Beijing, according to a senior State Department official. The U.S. has set up the Countering Economic Coercion Task Force to help allies and partners deal with China's economic coercion, which it views as a threat. The move comes after China stopped all imports from Lithuania for allowing Taiwan to open a de facto embassy in Vilnius. The U.S. is open to providing support and resources to countries facing economic coercion from China to help them make decisions and feel supported. Zelensky says the Israel-Hamas war is distracting from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It is, which benefits Putin. Yahoo! Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Saturday that the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas is diverting attention from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. According to Stephen Walt, a professor of international affairs at Harvard, Israel's war on Hamas will have non-trivial effects on other conflicts, including the war in Ukraine. Walt believes that the U.S. and other countries will have limited bandwidth to support allies in wartime, which will result in other countries, such as Ukraine, feeling neglected and potentially leading to munition shortages. Ethics agency says Delaware officials improperly paid employees to care for seized farm animals. Associated Press. Delaware's State Agriculture Secretary, Michael Skews, and one of his top deputies have violated state law by entering no-bid agreements with Department of Agriculture employees to care for farm animals seized by animal welfare officials. Biden admin urges court to allow confidential contraceptive access for teens. Reuters. The Biden administration is urging a federal appeals court to allow minors in Texas to access birth control through clinics funded by a federal program without having their parents notified. The administration is asking a three-judge panel of the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals to overturn a ruling by U.S. District Judge Matthew Kaczmarek, who last December ruled in favor of Alexander Deanda, a man who claimed that the so-called Title X family planning clinic program removed his right to direct his daughter's upbringing. Biden administration, after setbacks, talks up renewable power gains. New York Times. The Biden administration has announced progress on 15 large renewable energy projects in an effort to bolster confidence in the industry as it faces mounting challenges. The projects are all located on federal lands in the West and include a geothermal lease sale in northern Nevada, the construction of a transmission line west of Phoenix, and the completion of over 800 megawatts of solar power in Southern California. The administration aims to issue permits for 25 gigawatts of renewable energy on public lands by 2025, enough to power around 5 million homes. Tuesday briefing, Israel cuts the Gaza Strip in two. New York Times. The Israeli military has said that it has encircled Gaza City, effectively splitting the Gaza Strip in half. The move is intended to make it harder for Hamas to retain control of the area. The extent of the fighting is unclear because of a communication blackout in Gaza, but Israel said it had struck 450 targets overnight on Sunday. As the Israeli military pushed ahead, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken was in Turkey on the final stop of a Middle East tour. Blinken said that the Biden administration was working aggressively to get more humanitarian assistance into Gaza. During his trip, Blinken repeatedly warned Iran against using proxies to widen the conflict between Israel and Hamas. The UN said that 88 of its staff members aiding Palestinian refugees had been killed, its highest toll in a single conflict. Doctors in Gaza say that they are performing surgeries without anesthesia, after weeks of Israeli bombing severely depleted medicine, water, food, and fuel. Are young voters actually split between Trump and Biden? Washington Post. Polls conducted in 6 key battleground states, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, show that young voters, aged 18 to 29, are essentially split between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump. Among all registered voters under the age of 30, Trump and Biden are tied. Biden's lead among young voters is smaller than in the 2020 election, and there has been a shift to the right among the youngest voters. The polling also shows shifts in preferences among Hispanic and Black respondents. The article suggests that young voters may be unenthusiastic about Biden relative to past candidates, noting that young people are disproportionately likely to be independents. Trump challenged by Zelensky to come to Ukraine. The Independent. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has invited former U.S. President Donald Trump to visit Ukraine amid ongoing comments by Trump about the Ukraine-Russia war. Zelensky's invitation is seen as a response to Trump's claims that he could manage it and finish the war in 24 hours, as well as a challenge to Trump's desire to look presidential. Zelensky has enjoyed a strong alliance with current President Joe Biden, but Republicans have been increasingly skeptical of aid packages to Ukraine. Trump's party continues to debate whether to support Ukraine or Russia in the conflict. Senate Republicans outline border security measures they want as a condition for aiding Ukraine. Yahoo! Senate Republicans have released a sweeping set of U.S. border security proposals as a condition for sending more aid to Ukraine, laying out a draft plan to resume construction on parts of the U.S.-Mexico border wall, curtail humanitarian parole for people who cross into the United States, and make it more difficult for migrants to qualify for asylum. Former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows sued by book publisher for breach of contract. Associated Press. Publisher All Seasons Press is suing former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows for allegedly contradicting his book's claim about the 2020 election. The publisher claims that sworn testimony by Meadows undermined the chief's chief, in which he wrote that the election was stolen from former President Donald Trump. All Seasons cited media reports from last month alleging that Meadows knew Trump had lost to Democrat Joe Biden. The publisher is seeking the return of Meadows' $350,000 advance and damages of more than $1 million. Cuba seeks foreign investment, thumbing nose at U.S. sanctions. Reuters. Cuba hosted a business fair on Monday with over 800 companies from more than 60 countries, as it sought new investments and defied U.S. sanctions. The Cuban government blames the U.S. trade embargo and the pandemic for crippling tourism and domestic industries, resulting in a lack of cash to import basic goods. The U.S. says its trade embargo is aimed at promoting human rights and liberties in Cuba, and has barely budged in decades. Former Obama advisor Messina dismisses latest Trump-Biden polls. Hill. Former Obama advisor Jim Messina dismissed recent polls showing President Biden trailing former President Trump, stating that it is too early to be concerned. Messina argued that people will begin to pay closer attention to the candidates when the election comes around next year, and that the current comparisons are being made between Biden and an unspecified Republican nominee. Messina also emphasized that Biden remains in a strong position to win the election if he stays in the race. Some Democrats have expressed concerns over the poll numbers, with former Obama advisor David Axelrod suggesting that Biden drop out of the 2024 presidential race. Well, folks, it's your friendly neighborhood Six Doctor here, bringing you the latest news from the six-dimensional world. Let's dive right in. First up, it seems that some Democrats are worried about President Biden's re-election campaign. Polls are showing that former President Trump is leading in a potential head-to-head matchup, and there are concerns about Biden's support among black voters. Democrats are urging Biden to shift his messaging and tactics to address these concerns. In other news, Donald Trump is testifying in a civil case where he and his business are accused of fraud. He clashed with the judge and defended his company, while also claiming to be targeted for political reasons. Meanwhile, former Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke has filed a bill calling for the expulsion of Palestinians from the U.S., which has drawn criticism. Democratic Representative Rashida Tlaib has also drawn criticism for her comments about Israel and Palestine, with fellow Democrats calling them divisive and counterproductive. The ongoing Israeli-Gaza conflict is causing a rift among Democrats in Congress, with some calling for a complete ceasefire while others fear it would give Hamas time to regroup. On the Republican side, at least 5 candidates are expected to participate in the third 2024 presidential debate, while Donald Trump plans to skip the event. And speaking of Trump, it turns out that President Biden has been telling a false story about an exchange he had with an Amtrak worker. Despite being fact-checked, he continues to tell the untrue tale. In international news, Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng is set to visit the U.S. this week, and the U.S. is willing to share its knowledge of China's economic coercion tactics with other countries. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas of distracting from Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And in Cuba, the government is seeking foreign investment despite U.S. sanctions. Lastly, there are some interesting developments in the world of publishing. Former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows is being sued by his book publisher for allegedly contradicting the book's claim about the 2020 election. And former Obama advisor Jim Messina has dismissed recent polls showing President Biden trailing former President Trump, saying it's too early to be concerned. Well, there you have it, folks. Another day, another round of political drama. As always, I'm here to provide the analysis and humor you need to make sense of it all. Now, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on these news stories? Are you worried about Biden's re-election campaign? Do you think Trump will participate in the 2024 presidential race? Let's get the discussion going. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.